join me in a spirit of meditation, reflection, or prayer, whatever is your preference, as we deepen into our service this morning. I invite you to close your eyes if you're comfortable doing that. Breathe deeply. Whether you have come here with heart full or heart empty, with spirits high or low, rested or tired, hopeful or despairing, whether we have come here out of habit, conviction, loneliness, or curiosity, you belong here because you are here. And all that you have and all that you are is welcome here. This morning, we are together the heartbeat of this congregation. And at this time, I would like to invite Seth, please, to come and light the chalice, which is the symbol of the spark of life in each of us. You can have a little more meditation while he does that. O divine love, with the kindling of this flame, may we realize and love our true selves, our true round belly selves, our true bags under our eyes selves, our true naturally hairy selves, our true wrinkles on our skin selves. May our self-love help keep our chalice ablaze. So today, I'd like to share with you a reading. It's a poem, and it's called Too Much by Tyler Ford, and I think a lot of you will appreciate this poem as I did when it was presented to me. Too Much by Tyler Ford. Do you remember the first time you were called annoying? How your breath stopped short in your chest? The way the light drained from your eyes? Though you knew your cheeks were ablaze? And the way your throat tightened as you tried to form an argument that got lost on your tongue? Your eyes never left the floor that day. You were 13. You're 20 now, and I still see the light fade from your eyes when you talk about your interests for too long. Apologies littering every other sentence, words trailing off a cliff you haven't jumped from in 7 years. I could listen to you forever, though I know speaking for more than 3 uninterrupted minutes makes you anxious. All I want you to know is that you deserve to be heard. For 3 minutes, for 10 minutes, for 2 hours, forever. There will be people who cannot handle your grace, your beauty, your wisdom, your heart, mostly because they can't handle their own. But you will never be and have never been too much.
The researcher Brené Brown has made shame and vulnerability a hot topic over the last few years. I think she actually managed to shift the collective conscious of our nation, or at least the part of it that listens to and shares TED Talks. Brown says that guilt is saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. And shame is saying, I'm sorry, I am a mistake. Guilt can be a useful tool, as long as it lasts only long enough for us to internalize the lesson, and then, wiser, we move on. Shame, on the other hand, tends to move in and get comfortable and prevents us from growing and progressing. Shame comes in many flavors. It can be tied to things we have done or failed to do. A friend's college roommate was the driver in a car crash that was fatal for other people. Because of that experience, she was not in sync with her young, relatively carefree peers. We all make mistakes. Every day we make mistakes. And sometimes the consequences of those mistakes are horrific, and clawing our way out of the shame of those mistakes is a daunting task. I hope that you do not carry that kind of weight. But I think all of us, at least once in our lives, have done harm to another life in a way that haunts us. Perhaps we were deliberately or casually cruel, or we failed to intervene when others were being cruel. Maybe our judgment was off. Maybe we thought we knew more than we did. Human beings mess up pretty regularly, and sometimes our messes leave scars and shame. Another flavor of shame manifests itself when we are born something other than what our parents or society wanted. If our gender, our sexual orientation, our size, our color, our ambitions, our volume, our abilities, or our temperament don't mesh with the microcosm of our family or community values, we are often left to struggle for a lifetime with internalized shame. When we are told from the moment we begin to form a notion of self that our self is less than, it becomes an integral part of our being. It's rare that someone can separate notions of self from these early messages. And it is pretty unfair that we should be born into shame. I recently rewatched an old television show about paramedics that was popular when I was young. The show, which was a primetime mainstream program, was fascinating in its depiction of women. Women who were trying to break into non-traditional roles were mocked and presented as strident and absurd. Male characters routinely used words like dog and chick to describe women. Overweight women were especially savaged. At the same time I was rewatching the show, I was reading a book called Making Love Just by Marvin Ellison. And Ellison examines the way our sexual mores are not so much an ethical or biological system as a way for a particular group of dominant men to maintain power and control. The book describes in great detail how sex is used to wield power. It was a disturbing read. I was dismayed to realize this was exactly the world I grew up in, and that I had, despite being a feminist from an early age, internalized the shame in these destructive messages. My children, on the other hand, grew up in a different climate, and I can see now why our conversations about sexuality and about feminism were so dissonant. Yet the past 3 years have surfaced the reality that things are not all better for girls and women, just as it has surfaced similar messages for people of color, people who identify as LGBTQIA+, and people who practice Judaism or Islam, and on and on. There are not many people living in America who are raised to embrace their whole selves, and many of us have internalized the shame of being someone who is less than. I also want to hold up the shame of not being enough. I don't want to out anybody, but I am pretty sure that kind of shame, the sense of not being enough, lives in every single one of us. We are living in this crazy world of about 7.7 billion people. And despite all the messages telling us that we should strive to be the best, it is pretty hard to be better than the other 7,699,999,999 people. I've lived in small towns, and somebody observed once that the beauty of living in a small town is that if you have a notion and can cobble together some resources, you can be just about anything. You can start a dance school or a radio program or a library. Unfortunately, most of us live in cities now, and there is a lot of competition for anything you might want to try. So first you need to get educated and then credentialed and then compete to prove that you are the best possible person to do that job. And really, how likely is it that you are the best possible person? And it would help if not only were you the best possible person, but if you could bring an additional 15 skill sets to the position, that would help. So we go out into this impossible world and put our game face on, and this just ups the ante. Now everyone is looking shiny, even if they are pretty ordinary. Think about it, what % of people will be remembered 100 years after they have died? We are all mostly ordinary. But with more and more people and less work due to automation, we have shifted into a culture of superstars and the rest of us. Where we used to tell stories to one another and sing together, now we are mostly relegated to the audience. Only the best of the best get to do. You may feel that on a Sunday morning when it comes time to sing and you silently mouth the words or stare off into space. But it isn't just the arts or jobs. We also know we are not pretty enough, or thin enough, or smart enough, or rich enough, or talented enough, or funny enough, or kind enough, or brave enough. We just aren't enough. So we feel shame. At least we can excel at that. So what does it matter if we feel shameful? It matters because shame diminishes us as human beings and stunts our growth. Shame also keeps us from being brave and showing up fully in our lives. Shame impedes courage in at least 3 ways: in the justice we seek for the world, in our relationships, and in our own inner lives. The Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force of one fellowship I was a part of previewed an educational film. In the film, one diversity trainer noted that as people find out about their white privilege, they have a breakdown and are stricken with shame and guilt. She acerically noted that you want to get past that bother as quickly as possible. She said we did not create this system and we did not choose to be born privileged, and so she encourages people to get past the wallowing and on to something more helpful. A little guilt is good. It lets us know we are waking up to the reality of the way things truly are. But if guilt slides off into shame and we stop there, who is served? I wonder if this shame is why women have largely dominated much anti-racism work so far in the Unitarian Universalism tradition. Perhaps white men, who are most closely aligned with unearned privilege and power, are immobilized by shame. I'd like to know. I'd like to hear from white men, because if we stop at shame, justice is not served. We need to be brave enough to face our culpability and move beyond shame to begin to build something better. We cannot rest with just feeling bad. Another way that shame keeps us from being brave is in our relationships. Franciscan priest Richard Rohr says, "All healthy religion shows you what to do with your pain." And he adds, if we do not transform our pain, we will most assuredly transmit it. The shame we carry around with us keeps us from being fully present in our relationships and severs healthy connections. If someone is carrying shame, it is present in the relationship, whether it is named and acknowledged or not. And when others do not understand the dynamics shame brings, there is the risk that they will absorb the shame without even understanding why. In their book, Soul Repair, Rita Nakashima-Brock and Gabriella Latini explore moral injury in soldiers. I apologize for the gendered language in this passage. They describe moral injury like this. Any person with a conscience feels occasional guilt or shame for something she or he did, but war can require extreme action that violate the very basis of moral identity. The life or death urgency of war forces untenable actions that can elicit profound guilt or shame. When we feel that what we did was wrong or unforgivable, and that our lives and our meaning system no longer make sense, our reason for living is in tatters. The shattering of the soul challenges what holds life together, and the anguish of moral injury begins. They go on to describe one person's experience with moral injury. Shortly after returning from Vietnam, Mac married the young woman to whom he had gotten engaged after deployment. But the man his fiancée married was not the man who left for war. While he was never physically violent, Mac admits he was very hard to live with. One day, his mother-in-law took him aside at a family function, looked deeply into his eyes, and asked, "Mac, you are no longer the man you used to be. What happened to you in Vietnam?" He could not give an answer, and his marriage lasted barely 5 years. Mac's story provides an example of how corrosive shame can be in relationships. Some of these soldiers find relief in meeting with other soldiers and sharing their stories and their shame with people who can listen with understanding, without judgment or cheap absolution. They find it helpful not to be so isolated in their pain. Shame also gets in the way of us being well and whole within ourselves. Every time we make a little progress, our shame can pull us back. Consciously or unconsciously, we punish or sabotage ourselves because we think ourselves to be shameful people. We think, how can we allow ourselves to be beautiful and bright if we have maggots in our souls? I have a friend who is one of the kindest, wisest people I know. Yet every time we get together, there is the outing, and then there is the follow-up phone call where she apologizes for something. She feels fundamentally flawed as a human being and constantly regrets inflicting herself on others. Of course, she's totally off base. She never has anything to apologize for. But she is haunted by her own shame. Her friends and family see her as a deeply courageous and beautiful person, and I wish she could see herself that way. She consistently shows up for some really tough justice work. She does not let her shame stop her. But her internal life is exhausting, and I wonder what peace she could experience if she could let her shame go. So, what can we do about shame? My first year in seminary, I had an assignment to attend a religious service in a tradition that made me uncomfortable. I decided to go to Flatirons Community Church, which is a non-denominational Christian church with a weekly attendance of 16,000 people, split between 4 services. The service is very stripped down, and it consists almost entirely of a sermon and deafening rock music, complete with lights and smoke. As you walk in, there is a basket of earplugs. So the music had the desired effect. It was loud and repetitious, and I was very uncomfortable. I had very low expectations for the sermon because really, 16,000 people? What kind of mob psychology is that? And the sermon was essentially a feel-good message. But I found myself thinking about it and chewing on it a lot, and I have to admit, it was a great sermon. The minister was talking about Jesus dying for our sins and how because of that, we are all forgiven. He said people always confront him and say, but we're not all forgiven, right? Not Jeffrey Dahmer, not Hitler, not Pol Pot. The minister said that we had all better hope so, because if there is a line and some of us are forgiven and some are not, which side of that line are you on? He was espousing a very universalist theology. But what I found really intriguing was where he went from there. He challenged his congregation to dig deep and look at the shame they carry within themselves. He told them that if they honestly believed that Christ died for their sins and that by accepting Jesus as their personal Savior, they were really and truly forgiven, why couldn't they accept that forgiveness and let go of the shame? Their homework then was to find someone they trusted, someone close to Christ, and then confess their shame and let it go. Unitarian Universalists do not embrace substitutionary atonement, which means we do not believe that we were born in original sin, and only through the sacrifice of Jesus can we be forgiven and saved from our sins. In fact, most of us do not even have a concept of a personal God who can forgive us for the things we are ashamed of. We do, however, affirm that each person has inherent worth and dignity, and we work hard to see the good in every person. So is there something we can learn from that Flatirons minister, something we can use? Is there a way to set down the burden of our shame? If we are inherently worthwhile, and if we can embrace the fact that we are always merely human, is it possible to find forgiveness or absolution, or at least some compassionate understanding? Is there someone we trust that we can share our shame with and then set it down? Some shame has been with us so long it is hardwired into our little mammalian brains, and we will not likely be able to eradicate it. But can we step back and look at it a little more objectively? Can we bring some compassion to bear? Maybe we can do the brave things we want to do in our world, in our relationships, in ourselves, by accepting that while our shame can make us deeply uncomfortable, perhaps we do not need to give it the power to paralyze us. We have been dragging our shame around with us for a long time, and yet we still get up in the morning and do our work, nurture our covenants, reach out in love, and that has taken some strength. Each of you is already pretty brave in the ways you put one foot in front of the other. Can you take one more step now and set your shame down and accept your own lovely grace. Or at least replace that boulder of shame with a little pebble of it. I'm hoping you can, because we are all needed. We need you to courageously show up in the world with your whole self, because you are the only one of your kind. And this hurting world needs your unmitigated gifts. You are essential to the cause. You are human, you are held, you are worthy, you are loved. May you know it to be so. As we depart from one another, let our hearts be secure through every human season. Let our hearts be secure in seasons of anguish, in seasons of joy, in seasons of failure and seasons of success, in seasons of uncertainty and in seasons of security. Let our hearts be secure in this dual reality. We are worthy recipients of love and support we can never earn, and we are worthy providers of love and support others cannot earn. Let our hearts be secure, for hearts know and understand and will respond if invited in. Go in peace.